Hi, we're going to be talking about why you even study the Greek language. This is, of course, Koine Greek for our study in New Testament Greek. The purpose for studying Greek, the first purpose is that it helps us to see local color. We look at a passage and then we look at it in Greek, and it's the same passage. It's a little bit like looking at a photograph, a black and white photograph of a flower, and then you put the color photograph of it's the same picture, but you see a bit more in the richness of the color. And looking at the passage in its original language lets you see just a little bit more. Secondly, it helps to catch hidden meanings. For example, there's a passage over in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 19 where Jesus says to Peter, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you shall bind on earth," our English translation says, "shall be bound," estai didemonon. Actually, the Greek text, with the use of the perfect tense, we could translate this, "shall have been bound in heaven." There's a little nuance there that we catch. And whatever you shall loose on earth, instead of "shall be loose," we could actually render that "shall have been loosed." And that gives it just a little bit more that we might not have seen otherwise. Our third purpose for studying, it helps us to refute false teachings that sometimes try to misuse the Greek text. It's been said by Martin Luther, the languages are the sheath in which the sword of the Spirit is contained. And that sort of works. Now, there are three major language families. There's other offshoots of these, but the three major language families, you have the Semitic, that would be Hebrew and Aramaic and even modern-day Arabic. You have the Indo-European languages, of which both English and Greek were among those. And then you also have a bigger category. It's been called Hamitic. It's been subdivided into other areas too. Those are our three major language families. Certainly there are other offshoots of those branches. The Greek language goes all the way back to what you could call Proto-Greek. It's been called Linear B because we've found it only in writing. We don't actually know how it was pronounced. That's prior to 1200 BC. And then you have Classical Greek beginning around 1200 BC. Now that doesn't mean the year 1200 hit, suddenly everybody changed their talk. But no, it gradually changed and developed from that Proto-Greek into Classical Greek all the way up to around 333 BC. And it's at that time, and that's thanks to Alexander the Great. Now, he didn't invent the language or anything like that, but because he brings other influences, and now you've got people of different cultures, and they're all speaking Greek, but they're all changing the language a little bit. You, for example, get foreigners speaking English, and they speak it a little bit differently, and after a while, we all start speaking it a little bit differently, and that's what happened with Koine. The word Koine just means common, so common Greek, beginning with Alexander, and that grew and developed throughout the New Testament era, all the way up to 330 AD. Now, after Koine, you have the Byzantine period. This is where Christianity had become legalized, especially in the East. It had been legalized in the West too, but in the East, where they are still speaking Greek. And notice from 1330 all the way to 1453, that's the area of the Byzantine period, and Greek changes again throughout that era. And then finally we come to the modern day period, beginning in 1453, that's the fall of Constantinople, and all the way up to the present, so that the way words are pronounced today are very likely a bit different from the way even the same word might have been pronounced, or also the meaning that a word might have would have changed from Koine to Byzantine to the modern period. That doesn't mean all words are different, but some are. Now there's other influences in the Greek New Testament. For example, sometimes we see Hebraisms. That is, because the writers, even though they were writing in Greek, they're thinking in Hebrew, and so sometimes that gets reflected, especially if the dialogue that they are relating took place in Hebrew. So, for example, Mary says to the angel, when it's been announced that she's going to be with child, she says, "How can this be?" My translation says, "Since I am a virgin." But the Hebrew text, or the Greek text, actually says, "Since I know not a man." I do not know a man. And that's a Hebraism. It wouldn't really translate well in Greek. They could probably figure out what that was talking about, especially since she mentions the virgin part. But that's a Hebraism. It's a way of speaking in Hebrew that says that she had not participated in any sort of sexual relationships. Now, another influence that we have, less so, is Latinisms, although these are probably more just in the area of names. So the names of people, sometimes they have Latin names instead of Greek or Hebrew names. Also, we see this in the presence of some titles, sometimes official titles. We have the Latin title, even though it's in Greek letters, but it's really a Latin word instead of a Greek word.